Hello, my name is Verity Eloise Lorne, and last night I caught my sister-in-law plotting to drug me at my own family dinner. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I switched the glasses, and 15 minutes later, she collapsed right in front of everyone who pretended I didn't exist. The kitchen was glowing in that amber hue only old houses can hold, soft and forgiving. The smell of rosemary and butter drifted through the air, but something sharper sliced through it. A voice. Celine's. Put the drug in her glass. She whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. My brother didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence between them was an agreement. My heart didn't race. It stopped, paused long enough for the next beat to sound heavier. I stared at the serving tray in my hands, my fingers tightening around its edges. The silver caught my reflection, steady and unfamiliar. I didn't drop it. I balanced it. The way I've balanced every secret this family has ever fed me. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. I'd been sensing it for years. The small looks, the way she said my name like it was sour. This was simply confirmation. When I turned, the kitchen mirror caught me. My brother stood behind Celine, his shoulders slumped, his eyes anywhere but hers. He nodded, weakly, like someone surrendering to something he knew was wrong. Everything okay, Very? He asked, voice trembling from a conscience he refused to use. It will be, I said, once the plates are right. He didn't ask what I meant. He never did. I walked to the counter, picked up 2 wine glasses, and traded them, mine for hers. My hand didn't shake. It was the steadiest it had ever been. The act was so small it might have gone unnoticed, but it felt like a revolution. The dining room buzzed with polite laughter, the kind that hides decay. Celine's voice floated through again, sweet and polished. Dinner's ready, everyone. We gathered around the table, a perfect family picture. Candles flickered, silverware chimed. Celine, in her pale dress, smiled at me as if I were lucky to sit there. She raised her glass. To peace and calm, finally, she said. They all laughed. I smiled back, lips pressed together, so tightly it hurt. They wanted peace, but only if I disappeared. As the dinner unfolded, I drifted in and out of their chatter. Vacations, renovations, a new car, every topic carefully avoiding the truth that we had become strangers bound by blood and expectation. I remembered other dinners, the way Celine would arrange the seats, so I ended up near the hallway, closer to the restroom, easier for you. The polite cruelty of it. I remembered giving her the keys to this house when Mother was sick. Just until she gets better, she'd said. I never got them back. Now, years later, she hosted dinners here. My mother's plates, my mother's tablecloth, her laughter spilling across the walls I once cleaned with my own hands. Marshall leaned in, murmuring something about how nice it was that everyone could finally be in the same room without tension. His words were oil poured over fire. Celine touched his arm. Let's not dwell on the past, she said. Her tone was sugar-hiding glass shards. I took a slow breath and watched her tilt her glass to her lips. Not yet, I thought. She laughed, that bright, rehearsed laugh that always made people look at her instead of the mess behind her. The sound filled the house, the same way mold fills the cracks. I placed the tray down, the silver clinking softly against the wood. My own glass gleamed beside hers, untouched, waiting. They thought they were hosting a dinner. They were setting a stage. And tonight, I decided who walked off alive. The sound of laughter turned into something more forced, stretched too tight, like an old cord about to snap. Celine sat at the head of the table, perfectly poised, a napkin folded into a triangle on her lap, her smile rehearsed and radiant. Marshall was beside her, murmuring something low and polite. His fork moved methodically, his eyes never quite meeting mine. I sat at the end, by the hallway, as always. My seat hadn't changed in years. It was the chair that rocked slightly when you shifted your weight, the one they joked about being easier access to the kitchen, though we all knew what it meant. That was my corner, the quiet one, the useful one. Verity, Celine said, her voice warm like syrup over something burnt. I hope it's not too salty for your blood pressure. You know how you get. A few laughs, soft and confused. I smiled, not because it was funny, because it was expected. I didn't touch the wine. Not yet. Looking back now, I should have seen it as a farewell toast. That's where it all started. Celine lifted her glass. To family, to peace, to moving forward. They echoed her like a choir of obligation. She drank. I watched. Her throat moved with precision, like everything she did. At first, there was no change. She kept smiling, making comments about vacation homes and yoga instructors. Colt bragged about his podcast. Leora passed roles with practiced grace. But then her smile stalled, just slightly. She blinked, rubbed her temple with 2 fingers, took another sip of water. I counted the seconds. 10, 20, 40. Marshall, she whispered, but it wasn't sharp. It wavered. He looked at her, puzzled. What is it? She opened her mouth, but the words came out slurred. Her fork fell. Her posture slackened like air was leaking from her. Colt sat upright. Is she okay? Leora gasped. Her hands hovered. Marshall stood, but didn't move toward her. Just stood. Celine slumped sideways, her shoulder knocking into Marshall's arm. Her wine glass tipped, its contents soaking the tablecloth. And I stood slowly. No panic. No rush. I reached for her glass, walked to the kitchen, and poured it down the drain. The sound of liquid hitting steel was louder than anything anyone said. Nobody screamed. Nobody called me back. Because part of them expected it. And part of me knew they'd rather she fall than hear my truth. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. I returned to the dining room. Leora had helped lay Celine on the couch. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was calm. She just needs air. Colt was texting someone, likely live streaming his crisis for followers. Marshall, he paced, his tie loosened, his mouth opened twice before any words came. She's probably just exhausted, been under a lot of pressure lately. The EMTs came 10 minutes later. Leora gave them space. Colt disappeared upstairs. I stood in the corner, present but invisible, like always. After they lifted Celine onto the stretcher, Marshall turned to me. His eyes were glazed. He couldn't even fake steadiness now. You should rest too, Mom, he said quietly. He couldn't meet my eyes. I walked him to the door. Just the 2 of us now. The hallway lights flickered softly behind us. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. I heard her. I said, his breath caught. He froze. That's all. No defense. No denial. Just silence. which meant everything I needed to know. The silence that followed him out the door felt heavier than his words could ever be. I stood there until the taillights disappeared down the street, the echo of that moment pressing into the walls like humidity after a storm. When I finally turned back toward the dining room, the table was clean again. The plates had been washed, the linens replaced, the candles snuffed out. Only Celine's chair was off-center, just enough to remind me she had been there. Morning light filtered through the windows, soft but unforgiving. Someone had already polished the silver and rearranged the flowers, as if order could rewrite the night before. I gathered the plate I never used, still resting in front of my seat. It was spotless. Even my absence had left nothing behind. When I reached for my mug, it wasn't where I'd left it. My favorite one, the one with the chipped rim and faded blue glaze, sat in the sink, half buried under other dishes. In its place, a plastic cup from some charity event gleamed under the cabinet light. I stared at it for a moment, then picked up the chipped mug. The crack along the handle felt like something familiar, something honest. Looking back, I should have known the erasure wouldn't stop at the dinner table. I carried the mug to the counter, poured myself coffee, and let the bitterness settle on my tongue. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock above the pantry. Somewhere upstairs, Colt's music thumped faintly, bass leaking through the walls. Life had resumed, apparently. I walked down the hallway to what used to be my mother's room. The door was open, the scent of new paint replacing the lavender she used to love. Celine had redecorated, soft beige curtains, white bedding, perfectly folded throws. Every trace of my mother's warmth was gone. Years ago, I had handed Celine the spare key to this house. Only until she's stable again, she'd said, smiling, pressing my fingers as if we were partners in care. I believed her. But when Mother passed, I never got that key back. The locks had been changed. Quietly, without asking. They didn't steal with force. They stole with permission, one soft step at a time. Now, standing in that doorway, I felt the weight of every inch they'd claimed. Each new rug, each picture frame, each corner repainted was a confession. They hadn't built a home, they'd rewritten one. I closed the door and turned toward the hallway. Colt was coming down the stairs, earbuds dangling. He stopped when he saw me. "Oh," he said, awkwardly rubbing his neck. "Didn't know you were still here. Mom said you were like just helping out." Just helping out. The words landed lightly, but cut deep. I smiled, so he wouldn't see the crack forming. "Something like that," I said. He nodded, already half gone. "Cool. Well, take care, Aunt V." Not Aunt Verity. Not family. Just V. Shortened. Manageable. Disposable. When his footsteps faded, I stood in the hall for a while, listening to the empty house. The air felt thinner, somehow. I used to belong here. Now I was background noise. I went to my room, the one they called the guest space when people visited. It still had my dresser, though most of my things had been moved into storage bins. A mirror hung above it, cracked in the lower corner. My reflection looked the same as the night before, except the eyes. They didn't ask for understanding anymore. They were steady, almost calm. I traced the edge of the crack with my fingertip. They didn't erase me. I whispered to the reflection. They tried, but I remember everything. And now I am going to make sure they do too. The words hung there, soft but solid. Looking back now, I can see that morning was the turning point. It wasn't about revenge, it was about recovery. The kind that comes when you finally see the pattern for what it is. I picked up the chipped mug again and carried it to my nightstand. Its imperfection didn't bother me anymore. It belonged to me just like the truth did. The house creaked under the weight of its new order, but I heard something else beneath it, a rhythm returning, faint but insistent. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The rhythm I heard the night before carried into morning, steady, dull, like the ticking of an unseen clock. I woke to the smell of coffee that wasn't mine and laughter that didn't belong to me. They were downstairs again, voices too bright for a family who just survived a scandal. I got dressed quietly and followed the noise, each creak of the stairs reminding me how many times I'd walked this same path trying to keep the peace. The brunch table looked like a stage set for redemption. Celine was resting, they said. Marshall stood at the head of the table, smiling as though nothing had cracked. Colt filmed a short clip for social media, the lens capturing a family that didn't exist. Leora looked uncomfortable, eyes darting between me and her father. To Marshall for organizing, someone said. A round of applause followed. To Colt for setting things up, another voice chimed in. To everyone who showed up, Marshall added, raising his glass with an easy grin. My name hung in the air, unspoken. I smiled, because what else was there to do? It's easier to pretend you don't notice when they erase you in public. Looking back now, that was the moment the mask stopped fitting. That's where it all started. Colt looked up from his phone, thumb still scrolling. You're always here, Aunt V. Are you, like, officially the housekeeper now? His tone was teasing, harmless to him. Leora frowned. Colt, don't. She turned to me and whispered, he didn't mean it. But he did. They all did, in their own way. I lifted my cup. The tea had gone cold, bitter at the bottom. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence around me had more to say than I ever could. I wasn't just excluded. I thought. I was reclassified. Not family, just function. The rest of the meal blurred. The conversation flowed without me, like water slipping around a stone. When it ended, I carried my plate to the sink. The others moved toward the living room, talking about plans, schedules, appearances. I walked the opposite direction, down the hall to my room. The air there felt still, heavier, like the room was holding its breath with me. I opened the desk drawer. The sound of old wood sliding against its frame filled the silence. Inside, a stack of yellowed papers waited, documents I'd forgotten I'd saved, copies of checks, invoices, receipts for school tuition, medical bills, grocery deliveries. My handwriting in the margins, tidy and small. For a moment, I just stared. Each paper was proof, dates, signatures, bank stamps. I hadn't imagined how much I'd given, how much they'd taken. I pulled out a manila envelope and began sorting them into piles. One for Marshall, one for Celine, another for shared expenses I'd covered alone. The ink smudged a little under my thumb. Let's see how invisible this becomes, I murmured. On record. Looking back, I realized it wasn't anger guiding me. Then it was clarity, the kind that comes when the fog finally lifts and you see what's been standing in front of you the whole time. That's where it all started. A knock interrupted my thoughts. I turned to find Darla my neighbor standing at the open side door. Her posture was casual, but her eyes said otherwise. "Hey, honey," she said softly. "Saw the ambulance yesterday. She okay?" I shrugged. "She's fine. Just tired." Darla leaned against the frame. "Funny thing," she added, lowering her voice. "I found a torn envelope in my recycling bin this morning. Had your mom's handwriting on it. Thought it was odd, considering she's been gone so long." My pulse skipped. "You're sure it was hers?" "Oh, I know her writing. Elegant loops, sharp endings, same as yours. I figured it must have blown in from the yard, but I thought you'd want to know." She didn't wait for me to answer, just patted the doorframe and said, "Take care of yourself, sweetheart," before heading down the steps. I stood there, one hand on the edge of the door, listening to her footsteps fade. That was the moment. Not the envelope, not the brunch, not even the cruel jokes that hid behind polite laughter. It was realizing that even the trash knew more truth than the people at that table. The family I'd fed, cleaned for, protected, they'd thrown away the last piece of my mother's voice without reading it. I closed the door, locked it this time. Somewhere upstairs, Colt's music started again, too loud for the hour. Marshall laughed at something on the television. The house was alive in all the wrong ways. I turned back to my desk, to the piles of paper now sorted and ready, the evidence of every quiet sacrifice I'd made. Looking back now, I should have felt grief. Instead, I felt something sharper, almost clean. I didn't know what was waiting for me next. The next evening carried the same airless quiet as the one before, but something felt different. The papers I'd sorted now sat neatly stacked on my desk, and for the first time, I didn't flinch when I looked at them. Proof has its own kind of peace. I was pouring tea when I heard a knock on the doorframe. Leora stood there, hair pulled into a loose braid, a wrinkled envelope clutched in both hands. "This was in the attic crawl space," she said, her voice careful, like she already knew it mattered. "Dad told me not to look through it." I wiped my hands on a towel and reached for it. The paper was brittle, corners soft with age. My heart gave a single, deliberate thud when I saw the handwriting. It was my mother's. The loops of her letters were graceful and exact, each one as familiar as her scent. "Where exactly did you find it?" I asked. "Behind a box of Christmas decorations," she said. "It looked like someone stuffed it there." I nodded, though my pulse was doing its own remembering. "Thank you, sweetheart." She hesitated. "Do you want me to stay?" "No," I said, soft but certain. "This one's between me and her." When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed. The light from the window made the envelope glow faintly, like something still alive inside it. I broke the seal, careful not to tear the paper within. The letter began with my name, written the way only she wrote it, every letter deliberate like a prayer, Verity. She dated it 7 months before she died. The words were simple, direct. She was leaving the house to me. "For your care, your sacrifice, and your right." A line near the end caught me. "If anyone challenges this, know that I made this choice in full clarity, not out of obligation, but love." Folded behind the letter was a copy of the deed, stamped and notarized. My name was there. My hand tightened, not from shock, but from the ache of understanding. No tears came. Grief had already taken what it wanted from me years ago. What filled me now was heavier, a kind of gravity pulling everything I thought I'd known into place. Looking back now, I realized that moment was the end of innocence. That's where it all started. I remembered the week she died. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and roses that were already wilting. Marshall told me the lawyer couldn't finalize the paperwork, that it was complicated. Celine had said, "Your mother wanted peace, not paperwork. Don't ruin her memory by talking about money." And I, foolishly softened by mourning, believed them. They hadn't misplaced her wishes. They buried them, like they hoped I'd bury my questions too. I folded the papers back into the envelope and sat for a long time staring at the floorboards. They creaked softly under the house's weight, whispering old secrets. I thought of Celine, how she'd stood in this same room, rearranging furniture, painting walls, calling it a new start. All along, she'd been erasing my mother's final word. A knock came again, lighter this time. I opened the door to find Darla, my neighbor, holding a plastic grocery bag. "Brought you some cornbread. Still warm," she said. Then her tone shifted. "I knew something was off when that fancy daughter-in-law of yours threw a stack of mail into my recycling bin last month. Saw handwriting I recognized right away. Elegant, like yours." My breath caught. "You're sure?" "Sure as rain," she said. "Didn't know what it was back then, but now I do. I should have said something sooner." "You just did." I told her. She nodded, patted my arm, and left. I stood there, the letter clutched in one hand, the smell of Darla's cornbread filling the air. Even the scent felt like proof now. Ordinary things grounding extraordinary betrayals. When I returned to my desk, I made copies of the letter and the deed. One slipped neatly into my folder of receipts. Another I sealed inside a fresh envelope with my lawyer's name on it. My pen hovered a moment before I wrote the note. This isn't revenge. It's restoration. Looking back, that was the first real breath I'd taken in years. As I sealed the envelope, the sky outside darkened. Somewhere down the hall, Marshall's phone buzzed, Celine's name lighting his screen. He answered in a whisper. I didn't bother to listen. Their noise no longer reached me. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was remembering out loud. The first account I closed was the family's credit card. I didn't hesitate. The digits disappeared from the screen like dust off a mirror, and I didn't blink. The bank's interface was sterile and polite. Are you sure? It asked. Yes. Click. Next was the auto insurance. Marshall's name, my payment. Then the life insurance policy I'd set up after Colt's accident junior year because no one else had thought ahead and I hadn't wanted them vulnerable. Gone. The health plan covering Celine's therapy sessions she once claimed helped her manage her patients with me. Canceled. Only Leora's tuition remained. For now, this wasn't revenge. It was arithmetic, subtraction. Line by line, I was removing myself from the story they kept rewriting without me. Looking back, it wasn't the money. It was the silence I'd paid for over the years, the price of being useful but unremembered. That's where it all started. By noon, the texts began. Marshall, did the card expire? Celine, missed call. Colt, Wi-Fi's out. Did someone change the password? Everything's down. I responded to none of them. I went out to the garden instead, pulled a few weeds near the corner where the hydrangeas had started blooming again. They looked stronger this year, like they'd been waiting for me to stop watering everyone else. I didn't realize it then, but that moment changed everything. Later that afternoon, I heard his car. The tires crunched gravel with more purpose than usual. Marshall didn't knock. He walked in like it was still his right. You could have said something, he said, standing in the doorway like a man robbed. I looked up from the kitchen table where I was sorting envelopes. I did, I said. Every time I paid a bill no one mentioned. Every time I made sure you didn't default on that second mortgage. Every time you thanked Celine for something I did. He shifted his weight. You're overreacting. We needed stability. I let that hang in the air. For a second, you didn't want stability. You wanted silence. And I was stability until I started remembering I had a voice. He rubbed the back of his neck. This isn't you. No, I said quietly. This is me, finally. We stood there, not as mother and son, not as family, but as two people whose contract had expired. That's where it all started. He left without another word. Didn't slam the door, didn't beg. Just walked out the same way he'd walked past me all these years. I went back to my desk. There was one more thing to send. I opened a blank message to Leora. If things get tense, remember, peace isn't always quiet. Sometimes it's finally saying, enough. No flourish, just truth. That evening, I boiled pasta for one, ate it slowly while listening to an old jazz station on the radio. Celine used to call it elevator music. I used to change it when she was around. Now I turn the volume up. They try next, I knew. The apologies rehearsed in mirrors. The voicemails full of concern that never showed up in real time. But I wasn't waiting anymore. It wasn't revenge. It was subtraction. And with every dollar removed, I felt my worth multiply. They tried soft tactics first, polite concern wrapped in manipulation. The phone rang just after lunch, sunlight spilling across the kitchen counter. I let it go to voicemail. When I finally listened, the voice was honeyed, practiced. Hi, Verity, dear. We've heard you're feeling left out. That's unfortunate. Families go through rough patches, but you know we all love you. You've just been under stress. Call us when you're ready to be reasonable. It was Celine's mother. Sweet voice. Sour intent. I deleted the message. I didn't need to hear the rest. I made tea instead, chamomile again, the scent calming even when I wasn't. Through the kitchen window, the trees shifted gently, their leaves brushing the light. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel out of place in this house. It was finally quiet on my terms. Looking back now, I should have known peace would never sit still for long. The knock on the door came at 3:17. Leora stood there, holding a pie in a glass dish, eyes hesitant. Mom's been intense, she said. I just wanted to see you. I smiled, stepping aside. You don't have to bring anything to visit me, sweetheart. I didn't bake it, she admitted, setting it down. She sent it, said it was an olive branch. We both knew it was a test. Then let's eat it as witnesses, I said. She laughed, a short, nervous sound. We sat at the table, forks unused, conversation stretching like fragile glass. Finally, I opened the drawer beside me, pulled out the folder, and slid it across to her. What's this? She asked. Something for your future, I said, because you saw me when they refused to. Her brow furrowed. She lifted the first page, the trust papers. You made this for me? Yes. She blinked, eyes wide. But why me? Because you never asked for anything. You never needed me to give something just to believe I mattered. She swallowed, her hands trembling slightly. They'll hate me for this. They'll get over it. I said, though we both knew they wouldn't. That's where it all started. My phone buzzed. Colt's name flashed across the screen. I didn't need to open the message to know its tone. Leora leaned over and read it anyway. Heard you're cutting us off. Harsh but classic. Her face flushed. I can't believe he sent that. I took the phone, pressed delete. He doesn't understand. She exhaled sharply. He doesn't want to. Exactly, I said. He was never taught to. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Outside, the day was fading into that gold-gray light that makes everything honest. I'm proud of you, I said suddenly, for asking questions, for seeing things for what they are. Leora looked down, blinking fast. I just didn't know how bad it was. It's not bad anymore. I told her. It's ending. When she left, she hugged me longer than usual. I watched her car pull away, the taillights blinking as she turned down the road. The quiet returned, but it felt different now, less lonely, more chosen. I sat at my desk and began to write. The letter to Celine came easily. No anger, no venom, just truth. This isn't an argument. It's acknowledgement. I have nothing left that belongs to you, and nothing of mine remains in your reach. I didn't sign it. I didn't seal it. I folded it neatly, struck a match, and fed it to the ashtray. The paper curled, burned, vanished. I don't need her to read it. I said aloud. I needed me to say it. That's where it all started. Afterward, I took a clean sheet of paper and wrote to Leora instead. This isn't about inheritance. It's about legacy, about what we choose to remember and what we refuse to repeat. I placed it on the table beside the untouched pie. The afternoon light hit the words, turning the ink almost silver. They'd spent years designing a house of glass. I just handed Leora the first stone. The silence didn't scare them. The stillness did. It was the pause before the storm, and they chose the worst time to test my resolve. Their car pulled up just as the afternoon light began to fade. I saw it through the window, Marshall's familiar silver sedan pulling too close to the porch as if the distance between us could be solved by parking lines. Celine sat beside him, her hair tied back, her face bare, the usual armor of presentation stripped away. When she stepped out, she didn't look at me at first. The screen door creaked when I opened it. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice soft, rehearsed. I nodded once. "You can stand there." Marshall gave her a warning glance. I could see in his eyes the exhaustion of a man stretched between guilt and loyalty. He'd aged in weeks. Maybe I had too. Celine's fingers twisted together. "We never wanted to hurt you," she said, the words almost convincing. "Things got exaggerated." I waited. The porch light buzzed faintly above us. The scent of pine drifted from the yard. She mistook my quiet for invitation. "You've misunderstood a lot," she continued, the edge of control sneaking back into her tone. "Mom's letter, the accounts, those things aren't what you think. We were trying to keep the family together." I stepped back into the house. "Wait here," I said. When I returned, I carried a folder, thin, worn at the corners. I handed it to Marshall. "You should read this. It's not a feud. It's history correcting itself." He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of the notarized letter from Mother, the receipts, and the trust documents bearing Leora's name. His shoulders sagged as he read. Celine stayed perfectly still, eyes darting between us. her expression somewhere between disbelief and pride, trying not to crack. "This isn't fair," she said finally, voice trembling. "You're punishing us." "No," I said, steady as stone. "I'm freeing myself. You built a world where I didn't exist unless I was useful. That's over now." Marshall shut the folder and held it to his chest. "What happens now?" "You live your life," I said, "and I'll live mine. But if you want to come here again, you write first. No surprise visits. No requests. No expectations." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Okay." Celine didn't respond. She turned toward the car, her heels clicking on the steps like punctuation marks in an argument she'd already lost. Marshall followed her, his hand brushing the railing like it might steady something in him. When the door shut behind them, the house exhaled. I walked through it one last time. The air was thick with echoes of laughter, of arguments, of years I'd given away trying to earn my own place. In the kitchen, the sunlight hit the chipped mug on the counter. I ran my thumb over its edge, then set it aside. In the hallway, I gathered the few things that still belonged to me: a suitcase, the deed, a stack of letters. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't need to. Upstairs, the curtains swayed from a draft, whispering through the room that used to be Mother's. I paused in the doorway. The walls were bare now. Even her scent was gone. But I could almost hear her voice. "You've done enough, Verity. You can stop now." I smiled. "I know," I whispered. "I finally did." Back downstairs, I placed a copy of the property title on the dining table, the same one where so many empty toasts had been made. I left it there for them to find, beside the vase of flowers that had begun to wilt. Outside, the sun dipped low, brushing the porch in amber light. My suitcase waited by the door, its handle worn from too many false starts. This time, it didn't feel heavy. I stood in the doorway a long while, taking in the silence I'd earned, the faint hum of traffic on the road, a bird somewhere in the trees, the wind moving through the branches like a sigh. I closed the door gently behind me. I wasn't moving out. I was letting them move on, without my silence, to protect them. The morning sunlight caught the windows of the small cottage and seemed to hold them in quiet reverence, as though it were honoring someone who had once stood there, someone long gone but not forgotten. The light didn't just touch the glass. It lingered, unmoving, as if reluctant to disturb the stillness that had taken root. I stepped out onto the narrow porch where, just 2 weeks earlier, I'd planted wildflowers with calloused fingers and the kind of hope that doesn't announce itself. The air was cool against my skin, and the wooden planks beneath my boots creaked with a sound I had come to trust. The soil was familiar, soft, slightly damp, and open. It didn't resist me. It simply received. I carried my chipped ceramic mug with me, the one with the fading green glaze, and the hairline crack I'd never repaired. I poured freshly brewed coffee into it, holding the mug close, letting its warmth settle into my palms like an old friend who knew not to ask too many questions. I inhaled deeply, breathing in not just the scent of coffee, but the scent of newness, possibility. That kind of morning scent that doesn't tell you what's ahead, but promises that it's yours to shape. The blooms were just starting to open. I watered them gently, careful not to flood the roots. The droplets clung to the petals, catching the light like tiny mirrors. They leaned toward me not because I demanded it, but because I stayed. That was enough for them. They recognized presence, not performance. I whispered nothing to them. There was no need. The silence between us was already a language. Looking back, I should have realized it. Then these plants would be the first witnesses, the quiet guardians of who I had become. Not the version others tried to write, but the one that grew from what they buried. That's where it began. Not in confrontation, not in rage, but in the moment I chose to stay rooted. Inside the cottage, the air smelled of old wood, lemon soap, and rain-soaked wind. I opened the top drawer of the nightstand, the one I hadn't touched in weeks. Inside were stacks of letters, pages filled with Leora's handwriting, loose loops, and careful punctuation. Her voice on paper. I found an old photograph of my mother, worn at the corners, her smile slightly off-center, as if she'd been caught mid-laughter. And there, too, were the trust documents, pages I had once carried like armor and secrets I'd never shared. I had held them back for so long that letting them rest now felt like an act of healing. My phone lit up on the windowsill. A message blinked onto the screen from the estate attorney. The final disbursement has been confirmed. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence in that room wasn't passive. It had teeth. It pressed into the moment like a truth that didn't need to shout. Earlier that day, I had passed the tiny post office on my way home from errands, just a roadside building with peeling paint and a metal flag by the door. Something drew me inside. A letter had arrived. I recognized the typed label immediately, my name, my address, and at the bottom, Colt's name in cold, bureaucratic font. I opened it in the car. His words were short, tight, and strangely distant. I still don't understand what you were trying to prove. That was all. No apology, no reflection, no willingness to see beyond himself. Just confusion dressed as concern. I folded the letter cleanly, precisely, and slid it into the glove box. But it didn't stay there. Before I reached the driveway, I pulled over and dropped it into a gas station bin. I didn't want it in my house. I didn't want it in my hands. I didn't want it in me. I had no room left for that kind of misunderstanding. I had spent too long trying to translate my truth for people committed to not hearing it. I was done carrying their confusion. Later that afternoon, Leora arrived. She knocked softly, holding a canvas bag filled with groceries and a spiral notebook tucked beneath her arm. She stood at my threshold, the same one she used to cross without asking. Now she waited. Her posture held the question gently, and her voice was tentative but sincere. "I'm writing a piece for school," she said. "It's about family dynamics. I want to define what home really means. Will you help me?" I didn't answer right away. I just stepped aside and motioned toward the porch swing. She followed, notebook in hand. I handed the notebook back to her. "Let's start with what it's not," I said quietly. She sat, nodded, and waited, and for the first time in years, I let the guard fall. The one I wore like armor. The one that kept me sharp, distant, safe. Maybe that was the real moment it began, the slow bloom of peace. Not a dramatic scene. No final confrontation. Just the soft shift of presence. The recognition that I didn't have to brace for impact anymore. We sat on that porch as the sun began to lower, dipping beneath the tree line. The wildflowers behind us shifted into shadow blue, their heads bowing gently in the dusk. The air smelled like damp soil, and promises whispered too quietly to hear. I held my mother's teacup in both hands. It was chipped Yes, imperfect, but it still held warmth. It still held memory. It still held me. I looked at Leora's notebook, at the way she paused before she wrote, as though she understood that truth requires silence before it reveals itself. I thought about how long it took me to ask my own questions, how long it took me to stop waiting for someone else to give me permission. They tried to bury me beneath silence, but they didn't know that silence, when given time, can grow roots. And when watered with truth and grief and unspoken prayers, those roots become something unshakable. I didn't win by shouting. I didn't win by revenge. I won by staying intact, by walking away when it cost everything, by showing up to my own life and refusing to let them write the ending for me. If someone tells my story, let them start here. Not with the things I lost, but with what I planted after. With the things I built quietly, patiently, without anyone noticing, until they bloomed too large to ignore. They didn't erase me, though they tried. They just taught me how deep roots go when no one's watching. And now I wonder, have you ever had to walk away, not to win, not to punish, but simply to reclaim your peace? If this story stirred something in you, subscribe. There are more truths waiting to be told, and you're not alone in them.